2019 general elections, Prime Minister Honorable Roosevelt Skerrit assumed the portfolio of Minister for Finance, Investments, Economic Affairs, Planning, Resilience, Sustainable Development, Telecommunications and Broadcasting. Mrs. Gloria Joseph was appointed Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Economic Affairs, Planning, Resilience, Sustainable Development, Telecommunications and Broadcasting. This ministry has many responsibilities, including economic planning and development, the Public Sector Investment Program, PSIP, building resilience, technical and development assistance, and telecommunications, to name a few. Like every other entity in Dominica, the ministry had to formulate a response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The response to the disease had to be quick, yet cautious and strategic. The threat of COVID-19 has permitted the ministry to make the necessary adjustments and work remotely to ensure that its staff were protected. Technology aided greatly in this adjustment.
We had to quickly adapt and adjust. So as permanent secretaries, we had to work out plans, how we could work remotely, how we could use more of the virtual technologies that are there to be able to communicate, to be able to accomplish some of the tasks that we had. So in the initial phase, it was a bit, I could say, challenging. You had unique situations where persons with underlying conditions, you had to make special considerations for them. Then you had persons, because of the nature of their work and the demand at that time for their work, they would not be required to be in office as much as before. And then you had persons who you considered to be essential in that they provided critical services that would be required at that time. So in the pure sense of frontline, some would be really frontline because the general public would still require certain services, and some would be the back office type, and there would be those who have a mix of responsibilities, so it was a mixture of being strategic in your approach, but yet still exercising consideration, knowing that there's the human side to individuals, and while some persons may not have had underlying conditions at the time, they were dealing with the whole trauma, with the whole shock of the situation, the fear of not knowing. So there was various considerations, but now, things have sort of not returned to normal 100%, but there's a sense of normalcy in some areas.
Safety measures for staff had to be put in place immediately. PS Joseph says a greater emphasis was placed on hygiene while equipping staff with the required safety equipment. The permanent secretary explained that some of the adjustments required staff working from home to protect themselves and family.
We had to observe the protocols that are established by the public service and also specifically by the Ministry of Health. So in terms of the ministry that I oversee, that's the Ministry of Economic Affairs, Planning, Resilience, so Sustainable Development, Telecommunications and Broadcasting, I had to think of the various units and divisions of the ministry and cater first and foremost to those that would need to be in the office or those that would need to continue their field work, that they would have some sort of hygiene or sanitation supplies, that they too would be protected. So they need to have masks, they need to have, in certain instances, gloves, they need to have hand washing liquid readily available, to have all the stuff that you need for Lysol. That was a difficult one, but wherever we could at the time, and supplementing with rubbing alcohol wherever we could, to ensure that the staff will, first and foremost, their health mattered and their well-being mattered. And then we would have to look at who needed to be at work and how we could ensure that they had, first of all, peace of mind, a feeling of security, not 100%, because you can never guarantee that a person is totally secure. For our ministry, in good times and in bad times, we have to be front. We are economic affairs, we are social affairs, we are planning, and so we cannot take a back seat. We have to be there looking at the situation, carrying out certain assessments, analyzing the data that we get, and being able to provide government with some sort of advice that could lead to stabilizing of the economy and social protection, protecting people's jobs and livelihood and, their well-being. So for us, when we could not come into the office at the initial stages, we employed various technologies, like we use Zoom to have a number of meetings and to be able to communicate, provide access to people to their files and to their databases so that they could work from home. And still keep together the bond, the camaraderie, to ensure that everybody is well taken care of. So it was adjusting.
Mrs. Joseph praised the staff of her ministry for their timely response during this pandemic. The PS said she is proud and impressed with the way her staff has adjusted.
I'm very proud of my staff. GIS is my staff. I'm very proud of my staff for their responsiveness, and the call to duty, the sense of obligation, being willing to go out there and to do what they have to do. I can tell you that almost every staff member has been responsive. You will have those that lag and those that have domestic situations that warrant that they stay home. For example, there are those that have young children, and the children would be out of school, out of daycare, out of preschool, and with no one to take care of them and to supervise them. These persons would require special arrangements where either they decide that they would want to take some vacation, if they have pending on the table, that they would take the vacation, or that we would make arrangements where they can rotate between the office, working in the office if needs be, and working at home. So it is a different context altogether, but the staff by and large, have responded. There's no one that say outrightly, no, I can't. The votes clerk needs to process the salaries. Think of it, if the votes clerk determine that they're not coming into work and situation, then all of us will be impacted, will not get paid. The cleaner, the messenger, So everybody is essential, and even those that are the lower rank realize how valuable they are, more than we even think.
The lives of Dominicans have been affected with the shutdown of all social gatherings, church services, and other similar activities. Like other parts of her life, P.S. Joseph says adjustments also had to be made for herself and her family in all aspects, including her religious life. She says they have used the opportunity to reach a wider audience.
I have several parts of my life and dual roles to play, sometimes more than dual, but in terms of church life, we've had to also reorient ourselves. The good thing with my family is that we've always been in the public, not the spotlight, in the public, and so it was very easy for us to readjust ourselves. We had to do what everybody did. That needed to congregate, needed to meet, realized that we could not just violate the laws, so we had to write to the Commission of Police and obtain permission for a limited few, like no more than 10, to be able to meet and to stream our services, and to bring it not only to our members but to so many people that are out there that are looking for answers, that are looking for hope, and I am really thrilled because we understand that now we can reach a larger population. On one of our services you can have 9,000 and 10,000 people viewing and commenting, so realize that our reach has been expanded, and that maybe is one of the positive things that we can take of COVID, because we're not limited to our little church, our little congregation, but we can reach regionally, we can reach internationally, and really offer something that breeds hope and assurance to people that it may take a while for us to get back to normal, but things have a way of falling in place.
Many believe that there may never be a revert to normal, as society has termed this the new normal. Mrs. Joseph explained what is expected of the new normal and its positive impact on society.
We have to learn to do things differently. For example, in the world of work, the aspect of trust has to be built, and responsibility goes hand in hand. So I trust you to be able to work without my eyes or the eyes of your supervisor peering at you. You embrace responsibility that you are being paid to do a job and that you execute it whether people are looking at you or not. Some of the things that we did, like for example in the public sector, there was a high volume of traveling for business meetings overseas. And sometimes those meetings were just like a one-day meeting. So you would have to take, sometimes based on where you're traveling to, 2 days to get there, 1 day for meeting, and 2 days to come back. Now when you work that into man hours, your real paid man hours may just be the 8 hours that you sat into a meeting and contributed to it. But the lost hours in traveling. And so we realized that we could accomplish a lot without being there in person and being virtual. And some of the technologies that we're using now gives you almost every privilege that you have, like us meeting here. We could still meet, we could still talk, and we didn't have to talk out of turn. Like on Zoom, you can raise your hand without literally raising your hand, so you can have an upraised hand, and the host of the meeting can mute your phones, your mics, so that the background noises don't filter into. And I find that it is a lot more productive time. For example, on Zoom you would have maybe 40 minutes of meeting times. Sometimes they give you much more time than that. So you now have to condense what focus on what really matters and execute in short time what you have to execute and still feel a sense of accomplishment. So in terms of structuring for productivity, so many things that have changed that I am really hoping that everything doesn't go back to normal and we just, take things for granted. The volume of wastage, now we print less. Less memos being printed and sending all over the place, photocopies of so many things, so we found that we always knew that we could, but it's just that we were a little bit averse to the technology and going paperless as much as we can. Now we circulate documents, we sit in a meeting and we can share our screen, and do our presentations. And we can circulate information in advance of the meetings. People can read, and so time and productivity are very key. And really, our hygiene and things that we would take for granted, I think certain things don't need to revert. That's my opinion on it.
Mrs. Joseph believes that much good can be derived from the new strategies put in place in light of this pandemic. Despite the impact of COVID-19 on all sectors and industries, the Permanent Secretary is confident that Dominica will bounce back in a manner that will benefit all sectors and residents.
It is a tough time for us nationally because the impact of COVID is a real thing. We can't be in denial about it. Government has had to expend a lot of money just in the initial response to facilitate the hospital, the isolation centers, the quarantine areas, to provide goods and services to those that need, and to be able to respond. It's going to be an increasing cost for us. So many people have lost their jobs, especially those in the tourism sector, and they are not sure when these the places of work and some of the business areas are going to revert, so it is a tough situation. If it were just domestic, we would be able to just gauge what initiatives that we can take and so on. but some things are so outside of your control, and when you're a small country, you respond to shock, external shock. So the fact that people cannot commute into Dominica, cannot travel into Dominica, is affecting not only the hotel or the guest house, it's affecting the restaurant, it's affecting the person with the little bar, the person that sells crafts, the person that does hair braiding, the taxi operator, the people that provide services all along the route and at different points. It's affecting them. So it is really a tough time for us, but I do not believe it's a hopeless time. We just need to become creative, and our people need to become exercise a little bit of patience and understanding, knowing that Rome wasn't built in a day, and situations hit you and you have to make the adjustments. So I believe that we together, if we remain positive and optimistic and we become creative and enterprising, we can fight this thing together. It may be an uphill climb, but the government is putting measures in place that I am not privileged to speak to, but that is left for my principals to speak to. But we're certainly thinking of ways and means and strategizing to respond.
One of the most beautiful things one can do is share a word of encouragement to each other. The Permanent Secretary urged the public to be tolerant of recovered patients of COVID-19 who are being stigmatized as they reintegrate into society.
These persons out there, first we should do our best not to stigmatize them, because it's not like COVID-19 was something they saw running somewhere and they jump and pick it up. Nobody wants to bring that upon themselves. So we should do our best to integrate them back into society. If they've been negative, they're negative. We're not telling people to be casual and to be careless and to be flippant with how they act and respond, but do not treat them like they are some worm of the dust and they don't belong. These are people that have fought this thing, and they have a lot that they can teach us, And so I would say to them, just be assured that you are not a nobody, you are somebody. In fact, you have done what many people around the world have fallen prey to, but by the grace of God, you are able to survive this, and you have a lot that you can teach people, and that you should not let what people say or how they act or react to you to daunt you or to break your spirit, but you need to be positive and use that too as your own platform to warn people, to caution people, and to guide people.
Dominica continues to make tremendous progress in the fight against COVID-19. Day by day, the reopening of the local economy is being witnessed, and all are encouraged to continue adhering to the various measures put in place by the Ministry of Health, Wellness and New Health Investment to ensure the safety of all citizens. Alia Martin for Government Information Service.